All right, I've got another one of these videos here. I wanted to see what the heck it was about. Goodbye, America. Um, I don't think I've reacted to this one, so I'm curious to see what it's all about. I'm kind of looking over the script real quick and stuff. Here we go.
Do you remember America? If
Oh,
you read
that
about
was
it in a
weird.
history textbook, you probably learned about a land of oppression, racism, sexism, income inequality, police brutality, and imperial wars.
So, that's I don't know. That doesn't seem quite accurate to say that you learn about that in a history textbook. American textbooks tend to be rather no rather tame mostly. I mean, racism you will hear because we kind of I think even the most patriotic person would acknowledge that America has been racist for a while. They might not say they're racist now, the most patriotic person, but they would definitely say that they were in the past with slavery and segregation and stuff. Um, Income inequality, that did happen in American history, and it does happen now. That's true. That's a that's factual. America has extreme income inequality. Sexism, yeah, we didn't let women vote until 100 years ago. Police brutality is more recent, although you will see some of that in the 60s with the civil rights movement. And imperial wars, I can't actually think of a time an imperial war was covered in a textbook, even though the America has attempted like 70 coups. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Let's see. Can we is this what I'm thinking of? Oh, I think this is not the list that I'm thinking of. Um this is the list I'm thinking of. Yeah, all the times that we were involved in regime change. All of those. Yeah, so those aren't in
Aside
a
from that, it
I
was a
haven't
great
seen those in a
place.
textbook, but
That is how America is portrayed in most American high schools and colleges.
um I mean, I had a textbook as a kid that was like the Trail of Tears was like the Native Americans just kind of moved. And I've seen other textbooks like that as well. They typically come from Texas, interestingly.
And America's media, films, and by its progressive politicians.
Progressive politicians, yes. Media, no. You're not going to get CNN to comment on imperial wars or income inequality, or CBS, or MSNBC, or the New York Times, or Washington Post. They're owned by Jeff Bezos.
In the words of filmmaker Michael Moore, America is a nation founded on genocide, built on the backs of slaves, and maintained through the subjugation of women to second class citizenship and economic disempowerment.
Which is true in a very literal sense because, the first thing America did when they arrived was both directly in many ways and indirectly in many ways caused the death of tens of millions of Native Americans. Um, let's see, how many? How many Native Americans? I don't know if this is the best way to term this, but yeah, let's see. There was a range of 2.1 to 7 million to a high of 18 million, according to here. Let's see. This paper's a little old, it looks like maybe, but some scholars say as high as 112 million, and it was definitely lower than 6 million by 1650. So the killing of that many people is, and then to later on in the future try and destroy their culture through like boarding schools and stuff, that's kind of fits the definition of genocide there. Built on the backs of slaves, yeah. The whole southern economy, which was half the country, literally half the country, because the states needed to be even so they could both deadlock the Senate. The state count needed to be even so they could deadlock the Senate. Um, they were completely run by slaves, and that was their whole economy. And subjugation of women, yeah, women couldn't vote until 100 years ago. They were second class citizens, yeah, because they couldn't vote, and economic dispowerment, yeah, because they had trouble like getting jobs or going to college or anything like that. That's not an unfair assessment of American history.
Um, Is that America's history? Is that who Americans were and are? George Orwell understood that the most effective way to destroy a people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history.
Which, just as a note, George Orwell was a democratic socialist.
History is much more than a collection of facts.
I imagine George Orwell would not, well, how should I phrase this? Would not necessarily find it problematic to discuss the reality of the situation in that way because America literally did do those things.
History, and our understanding of it, tells us who we are as a people in the same way your personal memories and experiences define and shape who you are. Wipe out your memory, and you wipe out your identity. When you raise a generation of Americans to hold their country's past in contempt by exaggerating America's faults,
When did people exaggerate those faults? Those are pretty serious faults. Stating that they're pretty serious faults is not to exaggerate those faults. Like PragerU just doesn't just sees America. PragerU diminishes. PragerU wouldn't probably mention any of that, and it should be mentioned. That's stuff that's very important.
and ignoring its triumphs,
Also, not sure how America's history ignores its triumphs. America's pretty big on discussing all the things it does well. Like you can take whole classes just dedicated to like the Revolutionary War and World War II and things like that. America kind of big on our successes.
then they will have no respect for American institutions.
I think it's almost just normalized in a way. Like that's what lets them get away with this kind of point is that they say, "Oh, we trivialize our successes," but how? Like you learn about all American successes: the Revolutionary War, the Unions, and the Civil War. World War One, where we stepped in and made a big difference. World War Two, we learned about a lot more. And it's like, oh, America came in and America saved the day. And you hear about the Winston Churchill quote where it's like, please, America, come bail us out, or till God's till till in all God's power and might, the new world comes to the rescue of the old, or something like that. Like we kind of learn about our successes a lot.
Or the beliefs on which the nation is based. It hasn't always been this way.
Well, just because it has, well, I'll let him finish. I'll let him finish before
Until
I
the
say
last
anything.
few decades, liberals and conservatives alike shared a common understanding of America's origins, its history, and its mission of spreading liberty within America and around the world.
See, now this is kind of conflating the fact that that until recently everyone had a common consensus with the fact that it must be right, but that's not accurate because I don't think like things like that change quickly. Like just because you're more aware of your own situation in the world doesn't mean that when you weren't aware of those problems, you were right. It just means you were unaware. Like that's not a point in favor. And American liberty abroad is usually in the form of coups and throwing over like democratically elected governments, which is just a bit ironic. Like in Chile, when they elected a left wing guy, and America came in and propped up Pinochet, the dictator, for a decade, so he could kill tens of thousands of Chilean people just because we didn't want a socialist to get democratically elected in Chile.
They recognized America as the country of the Pilgrims in Jamestown, of the self evident truths of the Declaration of Independence, of the individual rights won through revolution and secured in the U.S. Constitution.
You can acknowledge those. I'm gonna look up the Chile. Can I go back actually? Yeah, I'm gonna look up the Chile thing while I'm talking. And what I was gonna say is, what year was Chile? Here we are. Yeah, the Soviets funded that. The U.S. supplied funding for this guy. He was overthrown by economic warfare. A botched kidnapping attempt backed by the CIA. The chief of staff of the army was assassinated. The CIA, through Project Fubelt, which is their operation to prevent Allende's rise and to promote military coup, helped to set up the rise of Pinochet, where he disappeared 3,000 people, imprisoned and tortured 30,000, and forced 200,000 Chileans into exile, and declassified U.S. documents prove that we were involved. But anyways, yeah. What was I saying beforehand? Is you can acknowledge that those are the rights that America's trying to build on, while also acknowledging that America has failed to provide those rights. That doesn't mean that like to compare the two of them like that. It's not this. It doesn't work that way. If that makes sense, like just because you're saying in the past we failed to make it isn't like some attack on your values or something. It's just saying that we haven't been able to successfully provide them, which is accurate. I don't think you would say we did individual rights won and secured when black people couldn't vote until the 1960s, which was only 60 years ago. Hasn't even been 60 years yet.
This was the country of the frontier spirit and of almost unlimited possibilities.
And you should also acknowledge that involved with that frontier spirit is that you had to displace the people who originally lived there in order for you to get that land, such as the Sioux, the Lakota Sioux, and the Cheyenne, and all of those Native American tribes, the Apache, all those Native American tribes out in the Midwest and the West that were forcibly removed off their land and on the reservations and had much of their population killed.
The country that paid for the sin of slavery with the carnage of its civil war.
Just because it paid for the sin of slavery doesn't mean that we solved all problems related to racism in the country. And it also doesn't ignore the fact that in the past, we would still have to teach that America did not, for even if it did solve all the problems right then and there, we would still have to acknowledge that America's past was at one point still really problematic. And we do kind of say that we literally talk in textbooks about how we ended slavery. Like that's literally going to be in every single textbook. And like you can't, like, you'd still be part of history to talk about the fact that America failed to provide it up until that point, even if everything got solved right after that point in 1865. Like, it'd still be in your history. Like, that's still a thing.
Of economic dynamism and endless invention. Of
I don't know about everyone else, but I learned a lot about inventions in high school. Like, a lot about inventions.
unparalleled individual opportunity.
Opportunity with an asterisk for the fact that black people couldn't access those opportunities, Native Americans couldn't access that opportunity, women couldn't access that opportunity,
And the
and
country that
more,
defeated fascism and communism in the 20th century.
which you do learn plenty about. You learn a lot about that. I spent months on the Cold War, and I could take a whole class on the Cold War. And I spent like a month on World War II. Like, there are whole units in high school dedicated to the Cold War and to World War II.
Previous generations took all this for granted and reveled in it. So what changed?
Just because you take it, but what changed is awareness about the American situation. Like, you can't say that you're providing individual rights and everyone has access to all these opportunities if for most of your history you have denied a significant segment of your population access to those same opportunities. How are you a country of all opportunity if black people have never been able to access those opportunities?
Starting in the 1960s, a new so called progressive narrative took hold that sought not to uplift, inspire, and unite, but to demean, degrade, and divide.
It's not demeaning, degrading, or dividing to say that America has to do better and has not done well in the past for its citizens, because it hasn't. That's a fact.
It sought to replace the pride of American achievement with shame.
It's not about pride and shame. It's just about teaching what happened. Like, there's no pride. Like, you can acknowledge the past in America and be like, yeah, we were really bad to like lots of people who weren't white men, and still say that you're proud of what America is supposed to accomplish and say that you want to make sure that everyone has access to that. It's not either or like Prager was trying to make it out to be.
Ironically, this all happened while America was making extraordinary strides in civil rights, especially for minorities and women.
That yes, but that doesn't mean that it's and like that doesn't mean that it's solved. Like just because you're making progress doesn't mean that you shouldn't say like that there's things to work on. Like just because like you know what I mean?
But anything less than perfection, which can never exist given the
It's not about perfection. It's about meeting the standards that you say that you want. Those individual rights and those freedoms and that opportunity have not been accessible by a lot of the population for most of the United States history. You can't say like perfection when they just want the values, unless the values that you are espousing are perfection, in which case, like you're about to say, you can't reach the American ideal.
that every society is composed of flawed human beings, is now considered a total failure. And
When did anyone say it was a total failure? People are saying that it needs to be addressed and accounted for.
victims of the past are elevated as an indictment of the present. Along the way, all the classic American touchstones
No, another conflation because victims of the past are discussed along with, in tandem with, the fact that there's still improvements to make in the prison.
have been undermined. According to the progressive narrative, Christopher Columbus discovered America only to despoil it. The founders wrote
Not to despoil it, he just happened to be a not good person. Like he would kill like parents' babies in front of them and things like that. Like he was exploitative and he forced them into slavery, the Native Americans. He was not a good person.
wrote the Constitution only to codify their ownership of slaves.
There was serious discussion about slave ownership um, when making the Constitution, but let's see if I can find it while I hold my microphone. Let's see. Other persons, such persons might go there. Um, I don't know half these sites, so I'm just going to click on one of them. Constitutional Rights Foundation. There you go. Why not? Yeah, his words proclaimed freedom and equality. Yeah, at the times when the 500,000 black Americans were slaves. Um, with the power to regulate. Okay, meeting in secret sessions. They would write a new constitution. Should slaves count under the population? But that's not really what we were looking for. We were looking for, was it written to protect slavery? And in a way it was, because the Three-Fifths Compromise like
The great captains
implicitly
of industry
encapsulates
enriched
slavery.
themselves only by exploiting the poor.
Yeah, in a way they do because companies we this is even in a way a conservative talking point because you hear Trump would talk about on his campaign trails talk about how companies were moving overseas and taking their jobs away from America to other countries. And the reason why they do that is because other countries have less strict labor laws and they can pay those people a lot less. That is how companies make even more money than they would be able to otherwise. They probably wouldn't move their jobs out of the United States if the United States and like Thailand were paying the same, had the same worker wage.
American traditions that were perfectly acceptable even a few years ago. Pledging allegiance to the flag, singing the national anthem, even saying Merry Christmas, have been called into question.
What is this Merry Christmas thing? Because I've literally never heard like any like person actually care that much about it. I only ever see it online. Like I've never heard anyone actually care. Like some people just say happy holidays because there are other holidays that exist this time of year that aren't just Christmas, like Hanukkah. There's just an acknowledgement of that situation.
questioned, mocked, and sometimes banned.
When?
The outcome
No,
of
no
this
one
new
bans this.
nonviolent civil war
There's no
between those who
nonviolent
hold
civil.
America and its
So
history in
dramatic.
contempt and those who, without denying its flaws, revere America, will determine the future of the American experiment, the new history we will make. Is America a country that was built by slavery, or a country that overcame and abolished slavery at the cost of 600,000 lives?
It could literally just be both. America did overcome slavery, but the only reason it had to overcome slavery is because it used slavery for the first almost 100 years of its existence.
Is America a country of rampant discrimination, or an accepting people in active pursuit of a more perfect union?
I don't think you can say America has been accepting of people in pursuit of a more perfect union when black people didn't have rights until 60 years ago, the right to vote until 60 years ago. Like we had to prevent America. We have to actively make discrimination illegal in America in order for us to not do it. Like there is definitely a problem there. And you can say that our making things illegal is the pursuit of that more perfect union. But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge the other side, which is that it's only necessary because there's discrimination that we need to prevent.
Is it a country of grinding exploitation, or a land of limitless opportunity?
You can have opportunity but still be exploited.
The time has come to choose. How will you remember America? I'm James Robbins, columnist for USA Today and author of Erasing America for Prager University.
Sure, erasing America. Sure. Well, there you go. That's what I've got for this one. I'm just looking on the side here to see how the government made you fat. Jordan Peterson educates climate activist. Interesting. Maybe I'll check out that one next. Because that'd be a response to a response to a person. I'll respond to a person responding to another person on a show. Wow. Inception. Anyways, thank you everyone for watching. Hopefully you found it interesting. Comment what you think and all that stuff. And I'll see you again soon.